12.3 Control Procurements. Control procurements is the process of managing procurement relationships, monitoring contract performance and making changes and corrections as appropriate and closing out contracts. The key benefit of this process is that it ensures that both the seller's and buyer's performance meet the project's requirements according to the terms of the legal agreement. This process is performed throughout the project as needed, and that's in the PMBOK guide page 492. When you think of controlling procurements, even after reading the introduction to this chapter, it's very easy to think of just contracts and agreements and of authorising payments and chasing after late or incorrect deliverables. But did you notice the very first sentence in the introduction? Control procurements is the process of managing procurement relationships. And so in the exam, you can expect questions related to contracts and agreements and to authorising payments and chasing after late and incorrect deliverables, but the underlying focus is largely concerned with managing the relationships between the buyer and the seller. Who is the buyer? As I mentioned in previous lessons, in the exam, you will be considered to be on the buyer's side of the contract relationship unless the question clearly says otherwise. There are binding legal aspects to contracts, and so everyone involved, both buyer and seller, needs to be aware of this and make all reasonable efforts to ensure that they don't unwittingly trigger a legal trap. However, although there are legal remedies built into contracts, using them is something to be done with fear and trepidation. There are two old sayings that spring to mind: only a fool rushes into court, and the only thing certain in law is that there is nothing certain in law. Another important point to consider is that usually sellers are much more familiar with selling than buyers are with buying, because sellers are in the business of selling and contracting, but buyers are involved in procurement contracts only when they need to be. And this means that sellers often have a lot more experience with contract law than the buyers have. To illustrate this point, I was interviewing a lady once for a project management position. She had worked as a project manager with a major international software developer. She told me that project managers in her organisation were instructed that from day one on the contract, they were to relentlessly document every possible contractual failure or contractual impediment made by the client. And then if things went badly wrong in the contract and it ended up in court, the seller would be represented with barristers pushing carts of incriminating documents, but the client would arrive with a lawyer, or mainly with unsubstantiated rumour and innuendo. In court, cases are won or lost on documentation. Your organisation may have its own legal department, especially if the organisation is large, but you have to make sure as project manager that you provide them with the right ammunition for court. And this is another great reason for recording lessons learned as you find them. But even if your organisation doesn't have a legal department, it is recommended the legal aspects of contract management are handled outside the project. Likewise, procurement management is usually managed by a department or function outside the project. Otherwise, trying to manage multiple interfaces at multiple levels within the project would overburden the team and mistakes will get made. However, although contracts can be administered outside the project management processes related to the contract work must occur within the project. When you're managing multiple sellers, you will spend a large amount of your time communicating with them and trying to correct miscommunications. You may recall from communications management that the project manager spends over 90% of their time communicating. This is a frequent exam question. But if you have multiple contracts and vendors, you are in danger of under-communicating in the other parts of the project because there's just one project manager. So, what activities can be administered outside the project? These may include collection of data and managing project records, including maintenance of detailed records of physical and financial performance and establishment of measurable procurement performance indicators. As I've said several times, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Refinement of procurement plans and schedules. This is not unlike the general administrative support that may be provided by a project manager to a project manager by the project management office. For example, creating and maintaining project schedules and reports. Set up for gathering, analysing and reporting procurement-related project data and preparation of periodic reports for the organisation. For the exam, please remember that data is a raw material. Reports and charts convert the data into information, and using the information converts information into knowledge. Monitoring the procurement environment so that the implementation can be facilitated or adjustments made. And payment of invoices. And although PMBOK guide isn't specific in this area, the instruction to make the payment should come from the project team. The PMBOK guide says in page 494, the quality of the controls, including the independence and credibility of the procurement audits, is crucial to the reliability of the procurement system. The organisation's code of ethics, its legal counsel and external legal advisory arrangements, including any ongoing anti-corruption initiatives that contribute to proper procurement controls. Control procurements also involves monitoring payments to the seller. This ensures that payment terms defined within the contract are met and that compensation is linked with the seller's progress as defined in the contract. A principal concern when making payments is to ensure that there's a close relationship of payments made to the actual work accomplished. A contract that requires payments linked to project output and deliverables rather than inputs such as labour hours and has better controls. Agreements can be amended at any time prior to contract closure by mutual consent in accordance with the change control terms of the agreement. Such amendments are typically captured in writing. Control procurement's inputs. Number 1, the project management plan. As I mentioned before, the project management plan, also known as a project plan, is not just a project schedule. The project management plan is a collection of 18 components made up of 12 subplans, 4 baselines, including the schedule baseline, the project life cycle and the development approach. You will find a full description in Table 4.1 on page 89 of the PMBOK guide. The project management plan components of interest to the control procurements process include requirements management plan. This describes how contractor requirements will be analysed, documented and managed. The risk management plan. This describes how risk activities created by sellers will be structured and performed on the project. Please note the wording for this for the exam. Risk activities created by sellers. There are a number of causes of risks in the control procurement process, and it seems strange to me that the seller risks have been highlighted by the PMBOK guide, but as I've mentioned before, the exam creators like testing you on exceptions. Procurement management plan, to inform you of the activities performed during the control procurement process. Change management plan, for instructions on processing seller created changes. Schedule baseline, if there are slippages created by the sellers that impact overall project performance, the schedule may need to be updated and approved to reflect the current expectations. Normally the PMBOK guide reminds you that the schedule baseline or any baseline can only be updated by raising a change request and having the change request approved through the integrated change control system. They forgot to remind you this time, so I did instead. Stop for a moment. Why aren't we using the project schedule as an input? Surely it would tell us when contracts start, wouldn't it? If you're thinking that I might be right about the schedule, then you've fallen into a common exam trap. As I mentioned before in the course, PMI grew out of gigantic projects in the 1960s, such as the Apollo project and the Polaris project. And in the exam, unless it clearly says otherwise, that is the size of the project be considered in the question. And so a schedule would also be vast, which means that you wouldn't see the forest for the trees. You would spend hours and hours just searching for contracts. A much better way would be if you had just a chart of just the main touch points of the schedule in an easy to find format. The good news is that we do. It's called the milestone list. I guess your next question would be, if the milestone list is what we need, then why is it not shown as an input from the project management plan? The simple answer is the milestone list is actually a project document. There are 33 project documents used in a project, but they are not included in the project management plan. Please study table 4.1 on page 89 of the PMBOK guide, which shows you the 18 components of the project management plan and the 33 project documents. But for the exam, especially when you're feeling stressed, be extremely careful not to confuse project business documents with project documents. There are just two project business documents. I know, I'm not going to tell you what they are again. You're going to have to find them for yourself in the PMBOK guide. That way you're going to remember them. But as a hint, look on page 29. One of the main differences which often appears in the exam is that the project manager can change the project documents but can't change the project business documents. Just as an aside, did you know that the PMP exam existed before the first PMBOK guide was written? 11 people took the very first PMP exam and only 4 passed it, and so the PMBOK guide was developed as a study guide for the exam. Input number 2, project documents. Project documents that can be considered as inputs to this process include the assumption log. It documents the assumptions that have been made during the procurement process, but the PMBOK guide forgot to mention that the PMBOK log also documents the constraints. Lessons learned register. In the exam, please remember that lessons learned on this project are recorded in the lessons learned register and should be recorded as they are learned, or you will forget them or misremember them. Lessons learned on previous projects are recorded in the lessons learned repository. At the end of the project or termination of a failed project, the project team will edit the lessons learned register and copy it into the lessons learned repository. Also in the exam, please note, this means that at any time in the project you will have access to 2 sets of lessons learned, the repository for previous lessons and the register for current lessons. Milestone list. The list of major milestones shows when the sellers are expected to deliver their results. And as I mentioned earlier, this is much easier to use for this process than the project schedule. Do you remember the exam trap about the project schedule I mentioned earlier in the course? It's important to know that you don't use a project schedule to manage your project. The schedule is for reporting to management. It is just a snapshot of the schedule model, the CPM or PDM network. It is the schedule model that you use for managing your project. The schedule created by your software application is not the same as the schedule on the exam. The schedule created by your software application is actually a combination of the schedule model and the schedule. Quality reports. These identify seller processes, procedures and products that are out of compliance. Requirements documentation may include technical documentation the seller is required to satisfy, and that list which we've read a few times, requirements and contractual and legal implications. It may include health, safety, security, performance, environmental, insurance, intellectual property rights, equal employment opportunity, licenses, permits and other non-technical requirements. Requirements traceability matrix. This links product requirements from their origin to the deliverables that satisfy them. Risk register. Each approved seller comes with its own unique set of risks depending on the seller's organisation, the duration of the contract, the external environment, the project delivery method, the type of contracting vehicle chosen, the final agreed upon price. As you become aware of the risks, these also need to be registered and assessed. Stakeholder register includes information about identified stakeholders, including contracted team members, selected sellers, contracting officers and other stakeholders who are involved in the procurements. There is an input missing from the control procurements. I don't know why it's missing, and this is a project communications plan. The control procurements process is heavy on communications, and the project communications plan defines how it should be done. But just remember on the exam that it's not an input to this process, and sometimes you get on the exam questions like, choose which are the inputs to a process, which are the outputs or whatever, so just remember this one. Input number 3, agreements. Agreements are understandings between parties, including understanding of the duties of each party. The relevant agreements are reviewed to verify terms and conditions are met. Agreements can include contracts, but not all agreements are contracts. For example, your project might have agreements with other departments of your organisation, but you can't have contracts with other departments because an organisation is a single legal entity, a single legal person, and a contract must be between at least 2 separate legal entities, because it would be impossible for you to sue yourself in court. Input number 4, procurement documentation. This contains complete supporting records for administration of the procurement processes and would include the statement of work, payment information, contractor work performance information, plans, drawings and other correspondence. Input number 5, approved change requests. These can include modifications to the terms and conditions of the contract, including the procurement statement of work, the SOW, pricing and descriptions of the products, services or results to be provided. All procurement related changes are formally documented in writing and approved before being implemented to the control procurements process. The project should have the capability of identifying, communicating and resolving changes that impact the work of multiple sellers. Input number 6, work performance. This contains seller data on project status, for example, technical performance, activities that have started or are in progress or have been completed, costs that have been incurred or committed, and seller invoices that have been paid. Input number 7, enterprise environmental factors would include contract change control system, marketplace conditions, financial management and accounts payable system. You might remember from the lesson create work breakdown structure in the project scope management module that the work packages, planning packages and control accounts have a numbering system called the code of accounts, which is mapped to the organization's chart of accounts in the accounts payable system, and this will be used to link contracts to payments. By an organization's code of ethics, this is most likely to be of interest if the seller is located in another country. Input number 8, organizational process assets. And the organizational process asset that can influence the control procurement process is the procurement policies. Control procurement tools and techniques. Number 1, what could this be now? Yes, expert judgment. Expertise should be considered from individuals or groups with specialised knowledge or training in the following topics: relevant functional areas such as finance, engineering, design, development, supply chain management, etc., laws, regulations and compliance requirements, and claims administration. Many organizations will have their own legal and procurement departments, or at least experts in these fields, and so they will provide much of the expert judgment. However, in the exam, watch out for contracts and procurements in areas where the organization has little experience, because the experts will be required to come from outside the organization. Tools and techniques. Number 2, claims administration. A claim arises when the buyer refuses to pay for constructive changes because the buyer and seller can't agree the price, or the buyer alleges that the work was never actually done. When they cannot be resolved, they become disputes, and finally they become appeals, which means they have to be handled in accordance with the Alternative Dispute Resolution, the ADR, procedures established in the contract. Settlement of all claims and disputes through negotiation is the preferred method, but as a last resort, the appeal can be heard in court. Claims are documented, processed, monitored and managed throughout the contract lifecycle, usually in accordance with the terms of the contract. Tools and techniques. Number 3, data analysis. Techniques that can be used in a monitor and control procurements includes performance reviews to measure, compare and analyse quality, resource, schedule and cost performance of the contract against the agreement. This includes identifying work packages that are ahead or behind schedule, over or under budget, or have resource or quality issues. Earned value analysis, EVA. Schedule and cost variances along with schedule and cost performance indexes are calculated to determine the degree of variance from target. Trend analysis. This can develop a forecast estimate at completion for cost performance to see if performance is improving or deteriorating. If you're confused by earned value analysis, please revise the lesson on control costs. Terms and techniques. Number 4, inspection. An inspection is a structured review of the work being performed by the contractor. This may involve a simple review of the deliverables or an actual physical review of the work itself. On a construction, engineering, infrastructure project, inspections involve literal walkthroughs of the site by both the buyer and the contractor to ensure a mutual understanding of the work in progress. Nowadays, some of the walkthroughs in remote or hazardous sites can be successfully performed using radio-controlled drones with video streaming. Tools and techniques. Number 5, audits. Please note for the exam that audits are structured reviews of the procurement process, not the individual procurements, following the rights and obligations related to audits if described in the procurement contract. Resulting audit observations should be brought to the attention of the buyer's project manager and the seller's project manager for adjustments to the project when necessary. Control procurements outputs. Output number 1, close procurements. The PMBOK guide says that the buyer, usually through its authorised procurement administrator, provides the seller with formal written notice that the contract has been completed. Requirements for formal procurement closure are usually defined in the terms and conditions of the contract and are included in the procurement management plan. Typically, all deliverables should be provided on time and meet technical and quality requirements, and there should be no outstanding claims or invoices, and all final payments should have been made. The project management team should have approved all deliverables prior to closure. Output number 2, work performance information, includes information on how a seller is performing by comparing the deliverables received, the technical performance achieved, and the costs incurred and accepted against the statement of work budget for the work performed. Output number 3, procurement documentation updates. The procurement documentation that may be updated includes a contract with all supporting schedules, requested on approved contract changes and approved change requests. Procurement documentation also includes any seller developed technical documentation and other work performance information such as deliverables, seller performance reports and warranties, financial documents including invoices and payment records, and the results of contact-related inspections. Output number 4, change requests. Change requests to the project management plan, its subsidiary plans and other components such as the cost baseline, schedule baseline, procurement management plan may result from the control procurements process. I find this slightly confusing, and you may too, because the project management plan is a collection of subplans, baselines, life cycle and management approach. And so the only way you can change the project management plan is by changing one of its components. As always, change requests are processed for review and action through the Perform Integrated Change Control process. Requested but unresolved changes may include direction provided by the buyer or actions taken by the seller, which the other party considers a constructive change to the project. What's a constructive change? A constructive change is an informal change, i.e. it has been performed but has not gone through the integrated change control system. Since any of these constructive changes may be disputed by one party and can lead to a claim against the other party, such changes are uniquely identified and documented by project correspondence. I put number 5, the project management plan updates. Any change to the project management plan goes through the organisation's change control process via a change request. Components that may require change requests for the project management plan include risk management plan. Specific risks are incorporated into the risk register, and if significant unexpected risks occur during the execution of the contract, the risk management plan may require updating. Procurement management plan. This contains the activities to be undertaken during the procurement process. Updates may be required depending on the results of the performance of the sellers during execution of the work. For example, you might find some sellers, especially the large ones, may refuse to play by the rules of your organisation while still following the terms of the contract. You might decide that the procurement management plan is too restrictive and modify it accordingly so that you don't waste time on needless arguments. Schedule baseline. If there are significant schedule changes created by sellers that impact overall project schedule performance, the baseline schedule may need to be updated and approved to reflect the current expectations. The buyer should be aware of any cascading impacts of schedule delays created by a seller that impact other sellers. Sometimes I've found it to be a false economy using different sellers for several contracts. At start, you can make significant savings by cherry-picking the best deal for each procurement item, but this will create more interfaces to be managed, which takes time and money and can create dependencies between sellers. Cost baseline. The contractor and material costs can change frequently during the delivery of the project. These changes can occur because of fluctuating material and labour prices created by the external economic environment and need to be incorporated into the cost baseline. But this depends upon whether or not cost fluctuations are included in the terms of the contract. One of the biggest risks, both positive and negative, is from overseas sellers because large changes in exchange rates are not under the control of the seller, and risks not under the control of the seller can't be transferred to them by the contract. I put number 6, project document updates. The project documents may be updated as a result of carrying out this process. They include the lessons learned register. The lessons learned register can be updated with techniques that were effective in maintaining the scope, schedule and cost of the procured item. Where variances occurred, the register should show the corrective actions that were used to respond to the variances and how effective those actions were. If there are any claims, information should be documented to avoid recurrences. Additional information on how to improve the procurement process can also be recorded. It's important to note that information in the lessons learned register may be truly recorded, but it may not be actually true. What I mean by this is that you record something you believe to be true but later proves to be false. And this is one of the reasons why you need to edit the lessons learned register at the end of the project before transferring it to the lessons learned repository. Resource requirements. To record changes resulting from the work being done that is not in accordance with the planned work schedule. Requirements traceability matrix. The requirements traceability matrix is updated with information on requirements that have been satisfied. Risk register. Each approved seller comes with its own unique set of risks depending on the seller's organisation, the duration of the contract, the external environment, the project delivery method, the type of contracting vehicle chosen and the final agreed upon price. Changes are made to the risk register during the execution of the project as early risks may no longer be applicable and new risks occur. Stakeholder register to record changes to the stakeholders. I put number 7, organisational process assets would include payment schedules and requests. All payments should be made in accordance with the procurement contract terms and conditions, and when these payments are made you will need to update both the payment schedules and requests information. Seller performance evaluation document. Seller performance evaluation document is prepared by the buyer and documents the seller's ability to continue to perform work on the current contract, if the seller should be allowed to perform work on future projects, or rates how well the seller is performing the project work or has performed in the past. Pre-qualified seller list updates. These are lists of potential sellers who have previously been qualified or approved. These lists will be updated during the procurement control process outcomes because sellers could be disqualified and removed from a list based on poor performance. Pre-qualified seller lists are common practice in government agencies and in large organisations. But please remember to edit this list to add notations where a seller has been underperforming, or if necessary to remove them completely, so that and also put in a note that they shouldn't be doing any further work in the future. Lessons learned repository. Lessons learned should be archived in the lessons learned repository to improve procurements in future projects. As I mentioned before, the lessons learned on the current project are stored in lessons learned register. At the end of the contract, the actual results of the procurement are compared with the projected results in the original procurement management plan. These lessons learned state if the project objectives were achieved, and if not, provides the reasons why they were not. The procurement file is a complete set of indexed contract documentation, including the closed contract, is prepared for inclusion into the final project files. That brings us to the end of the control procurements and also to the end of the project procurement management module. The next module is 13, project stakeholder management. Please read the corresponding chapter of the PMBOK guide before watching the video because you are a stakeholder of this course.